Ladies and gentlemen, this is an article that came out on time.com. And you know what? I am not surprised that it's coming down to this. Parents are cutting off their opioid addicted kids, and it's the toughest decision of their life. The only thing I'm surprised about that it did not happen sooner. After all, this addiction has gone on for 20 years. And now these families are now cutting off their children with addictions. That takes a big toll on the family when you have a drug addict in the house. This came out November 12th, 2018. And these folks that you see in the picture are the Humphrey family. Kim Humphrey was sitting in a sea of chairs surrounded by about 40 people he had never met when the Phoenix police officer finally realized what a train wreck his life was. He didn't want to talk about it, especially to a bunch of strangers, but his wife, Michelle, had researched addiction support groups online, found one at a recovery center across town, and dragged him there. So they all went, and now Kim is stewed silently in his seat, mentally rehashing the made-for-TV movie he found himself in. He had a moment of clarity. Kim isn't an addict, but like everyone else in the room, drug and alcohol abuse had sunk its barbs into his kids, and that was robbing him of his health, sanity, and nearly every penny he had. For close to a decade, he and Michelle had shuffled their two sons in and out of rehab centers and hospitals. They paid for cars, medical bills, and legal fees. They handed their sons cash for food, gas, and clothes. And when they realized it, all went towards drugs. They tried giving them gift cards instead. It turned out, thanks to a grocery store gift card redemption machine, those could be turned into drug money too. In some ways, they had been lucky. Both of their sons were alive, and as a public employee, Kim's health insurance had saved them thousands in medical costs. All told, the couple still spent more than $50,000 in a futile attempt to save their kids from addiction, he estimates. The emotional costs were even more staggering. By the time Kim made it to the first support group, the stress of wondering where his kids were, what they were doing, and whether it would end up killing them was so overwhelming. He'd taken a leave of absence from work. He was too depressed to make it into the office, he said. Some mornings he was too depressed to get out of bed. Wow. Now that's that's pretty messed up when you're watching both of your sons just fall into drugs, and it is just taking a toll on your health at this point in time. That's pretty messed up. I felt like, as a guy, a cop, a dad, that I should be able to solve this, Kim 57 says. We begged, we cajoled, we tried everything we could to get them help, and everything backfired. Money struggles are a common thing in addiction stories. Drug abuse, logic, rent money, and retirement savings don't often top an addict's list of priorities. As a result, many parents, like the Humphreys, foot the bill for every debt their child neglects. On top of every recovery strategy, rehab, outpatient counseling, therapy, they can throw their paychecks at. Kim met some of these people at his first meeting, and when he came back to the next week and the week after that, he still met more. He got to know their stories intimately. Parents who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, emptied their 401k, and declared bankruptcy on account of a child's addiction, a mother who had lost her home, a father who had replaced his daughter's car 8 different times, a couple who couldn't bear to kick their son out of the house, but because he'd stole so much of their money and disrupted so much of their lives, had resorted to letting him stay in their garage and feeding him meals through a doggy door. Damn. Oh, man. Woo. Now, those are some problems. The meetings were hosted by parents of addicted loved ones, PAL, a growing network of faith based support groups sprouting up across the country. Kim says it saved his family. For years, he and Michelle had wrestled with a question that plagues every family of an adult addict. Should we cut off our kids? Now they had an answer. For all the bleak public health reports, for all the PSAs, for all the fist pounding, change promising, parsiticin, hermongering, stump speeches, the magnitude of Americans' addiction problem is still remarkably hard to comprehend. At last, count more than 2 million Americans were addicted to heroin or prescription opioids, the umbrella term for painkillers like morphine, codeine, or hydrocodone. More than 70,000 people died, which is a lowball number, from a drug overdose last year, according to the federal estimates, prompting the Department of Health and Human Services to declare a public health emergency. Oh, wow. And because of the drug addiction, just like it's mentioning in the article, the American life expectancy is declining. But the struggles of families, if those stories are told at all, play second fiddle to the relentless cycle of overdose, withdrawal, and relapse in every addiction narrative. The burden alcohol and drug abuse places on millions of parents and the chokehold it has on their finances is itself a crisis. Watching a son or daughter succumb to drug abuse is a special kind of torment. Some parents feel deeply responsible for the addiction eating away at their child's personality, health, and future, even if it impetus without their control. So what they're saying is when their kids go on these drugs, they really have no way of controlling what's going on with them. And it's draining them financially because, let's face it, if you got a drug habit, you got to have money. And this is why drug addiction will eventually turn to crime. These folks will empty out their bank accounts. They'll spend their whole paycheck to get high. And as soon as the money runs out, that's why you'll see footage of them going into pharmacies, going into stores, holding it up, and robbing people at ATMs, snatching purses. They're doing everything out here to get their drug money now. I mean, and these folks are not only stealing money, they are dangerous. A lot of times you can go online, because I did a few videos on them holding up pharmacies and I showed the footage. It's a lot of them that are armed. Or the pharmacy will close, they'll break into the pharmacy and you'll see them on camera in the back where the drugs are, stealing all of the drugs, the narcotics. Okay, it's a grief so deep, there's even a medical term for it: chronic sorrow. The feeling of living loss, more commonly associated with parents of children with chronic health conditions. Naturally, they want to do everything in their power to stop it. Often, parents slip into a caretaker role, making their adult son or daughter meals, chaperoning them, and paying for everything from rent to rehab. Some clinicians call these relationships codependent, though lots of people working in the space reject the term, saying it puts undue blame on loved ones. What experts do agree on is that getting clean is largely independent of how much money you spend or what kind of rehab you spend it on. If individuals aren't ready to commit to sobriety, bankrolling their lifestyle or bailing them out of every debt, possibly, isn't going to persuade them otherwise. Parents are faced with this dilemma. Do I help them get out of this in a short term, or do I let them experience the natural consequences of their behavior? Says Kenneth Leonard, director of the Clinical and Research Institute on Addiction at the University of Buffalo. You don't want to do anything that will ruin their lives, but on the other hand, you want them to learn from experience. Nobody wants their child to suffer short term or long term. But Diane Duxon's son developed an opioid addiction in high school. Okay, she was resolute in her mission. I was going to save him, 67-year-old Diane says. What? She's 67 years old and had a high school? Boy, she must have had a baby late in life. All right, moving on. He had been prescribed painkillers for a football injury, gotten hooked, and switched to heroin. Now, as his friends went off to college and started families, he had morphed into a walking dare ad. When he wasn't out getting high, he laid slumped on her couch, zoned out in front of the TV. Diane, who lives in a middle-class neighborhood in Indiana, says she spent more than $70,000 on 8 rounds of rehab, outpatient counselors, and miscellaneous expenses that range from putting gas in her son's car to pay for his lawyer. After 8 years, nothing had worked. I remember walking through my living room one day and seeing my 130-pound son, who was supposed to be 160 pounds, sitting on the couch with needle marks in his arm, she said. And I heard his voice saying, "You're loving him to death." Shortly after, Diane gave her son a choice: stay at a local mission center, check yourself into a free rehab, or move in with a friend. Living at home and siphoning off her generosity were no longer options. He did move out and bounced around from couch to couch before eventually checking himself into rehab. Today, Diane said he's been sober for 6 years and co-owns a subcontracting business in New Hampshire. Okay. If I had not given him a choice, he'd be dead or in prison, she says. Okay, this redemption story isn't the norm. The truth is, we know very little about our addiction population and even less about how to treat them. People respond differently to recovery methods, especially when their addiction started as means to treat pain or when it underscores a mental health issue. According to a 2017 survey from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, 8.5 million adults in the US experience both mental health, that's depression, PTSD, anxiety, and a substance use co occurring disorder. 8.5 million people. See, ladies and gentlemen, that's why they can't control this thing. They let it spiral out of control where there are millions and millions of people out here on drugs dying every day by the thousands. I don't care how much they keep saying it's 100 and this and 200. No, they're dying by the thousands and they know it. All right. In the meantime, this is an economic burden we're all shouldering. Researchers at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that drug abuse of prescription opioids alone comes with a 78.5 billion annual economic price tag. Lawmakers are split on the effectiveness of harm reduction strategies like supervised uh, safe injection sites, but experts argue that the criminalization of drug possession, for which Black adults are more than twice as likely to be arrested as white adults, won't solve that problem. For many parents, the big financial question, the should we or shouldn't we, that what hangs over every family of an addicted loved one exists outside of these debates. Severing financial ties with an addict isn't a treatment method. So whether or not it works is beside the point. It's not about tough love or rock bottom, they say. It's about self-preservation and putting what's best for your family and the future of every member above the irrationality of an addicted brain. So I'm going to go down here. The decision to cut off an addicted son or daughter comes with a list. Okay, so they said when it got to the point where they decided to cut the addict off, um it was really hard for the parent in the beginning, but they said it was something that they felt they had to do. That's pretty much what they're saying. And in some cases their children got better, but in most cases, ladies and gentlemen, they don't get better. They go right on with their addiction, even if the parent is no longer there supporting them. That's usually the norm. Most of them do not recover at all, and they know it. But there's no way. I mean, this is another parent that says she spent $200,000 on her daughter's heroin addiction and keeping her around the house. And it just go to show you, when you coddle these people, you're not helping them at all. So it's just going over more families. And I will leave the link to this article in the description box, ladies and gentlemen, so that you can see all of these families and their stories on cutting off their addicted children because they pretty much had enough of them draining their finances by keeping them around. And to be honest with you, like I said, I'm surprised they haven't gotten around to this a lot sooner. because this addiction is bad. I know during the crack epidemic, I had a cousin that was strung out and they had to put him out. They had to throw him out. He was cleaning the house out, selling, their possessions on the street for money so he could keep up his crack habit. And all through his adult life, my family had to keep putting him in rehab. This was a cousin of mine. And I mean, he's gone now, he's deceased, but I remember everything they went through for years trying to get him help. And he would be all right for a short period of time and then always get back with the same crowd of people. And everything would just start all over again with their addiction. So, to be honest with you, these people aren't going through anything that the Black community did not face during the crack epidemic. Many of our people ended up kicked out of the house. Many of them ended up in jail, over their addiction. There was no offer of a lot of drug rehab like you see today. Nobody was calling it a public health emergency. They were calling it criminal, and people went to jail. So the circumstances were very different. Just a short time ago, crack epidemic really was not that long ago. But please tell me what you think of these parents cutting off their drug addicted children. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell. And hey, hit that like. Peace, family.